3,000 Japanese troops, one machine gunner. The night Manila John held Lunga Ridge. They're through the wire. Keep firing. Do not let them reach the guns. The man shouting those words is standing in the dark on a ridge in the South Pacific, on an island most Americans had never heard of 6 months earlier, and he is about to spend the next several hours doing something that no one who was not there has ever quite believed. The rain has stopped. The night has that particular black you only get in the tropics under a moonless sky, a black that eats the muzzle flashes of your own machine gun so that everything you can see only for the instant you are shooting. And in that instant, again and again, filling the light like a tide, are the faces of men trying to kill him. His name is Sergeant John Basilone. He is 25 years old. He is in charge of 2 sections of water-cooled machine guns dug into a piece of high ground above the Lunga River. And behind him, half a mile back, sits the piece of dirt that the entire war in the Pacific has, at this moment, come down to an airstrip called Henderson Field. If the ridge falls, the airstrip falls. If the airstrip falls, Guadalcanal falls. If Guadalcanal falls, the first American offensive of the entire Pacific War falls with it. The math ends on his ridge. It ends with him. Coming up the slope, in numbers no one in the Marine line will fully know until dawn, is a Japanese regiment. Thousands of men. They are the Sendai Division, veteran troops, and they have been ordered to run over the American Marines in the dark and take Henderson Field before sunrise. Some places along the perimeter, they are already through the wire. In some places, they are already inside the American positions. And they have made, coming up this particular ridge in the dark, one small tactical assumption that is about to cost them dearly. They believe the ridge has almost nobody on it. They have been told the Marines are sick and starving, and they are. Half the men in that line have malaria. All of them are on half rations. Most of them have not slept a full night in 6 weeks. Their intelligence has said the position is thinly held. And so the Japanese officers coming up in the dark expect a broken screen, a few pockets of resistance, an easy sweep to the airfield. They expect to overrun the line. What they hit instead is a wall of fire that does not stop. Does not stop when their first wave dies. It does not stop when their second wave dies against the same yards of dirt. It does not stop when the sky begins to turn gray. And it does not stop when the crews serving those guns are dead or wounded, and one man is running from position to position in the dark, dragging weapons, repairing weapons, gripping scalding metal with his own bare hands. Does not stop, because as long as one man in that emplacement is still upright, the guns are going to keep firing, and as long as the guns keep firing, the men in the dark in front of the ridge will believe there are dozens of Marines up there instead of 2 and 3 and finally just 1. He is not thinking about medals. There is no Medal of Honor yet. There is only the next belt of ammunition and the next gun that is jammed and the boy next to him who is dying and the impossible arithmetic of holding a line that is not supposed to hold. Before we climb up that ridge with him in the dark, and before we come out the other side of that night into a morning where only 3 Marines from his group are still alive, before we get to the second, harder reversal of his life, the one that comes after the medal and the parades, and given every reason to stay safe, walked back into the fire because he could not do otherwise. You have to understand where John Basilone started. To understand that, we have to leave the Lunga Ridge for a while and go home, back 6,000 miles in 8 years, to a small brick town in central New Jersey, to a family of 10 children of Italian immigrants, and to a restless boy who had already been to war once, in a country most of his neighbors could not find on a map, and who had come home certain of only one thing. He was not going to stay behind a counter for the rest of his life. "Johnny, sit down. You already did your 3 years. Whatever you're chasing, it isn't out there." Somebody in his family said something like that to him in the small, crowded kitchen of the Basilone house on First Avenue in Raritan, New Jersey, sometime in the middle of the 1930s. It didn't take. Nothing about staying home ever really took for Johnny Basilone. He nodded. He smiled his handsome Basilone smile, the one his sister said could get him out of anything. And he kept doing whatever it was he was already going to do. He had been born on November 4th, 1916 in Buffalo, New York, one of 10 children in an Italian immigrant family that had come to America the way half of Raritan had come, through Naples and Ellis Island, and a string of low-paying jobs, and finally to the brick and clapboard streets of a Jersey mill town where the Basilones settled and stayed. His father, Salvatore, was a tailor. His mother, Dora, kept the vast household running with the particular ferocity of women who have raised 10 children and buried, in that era, more than one. The Basilones were Catholic, hard-working, and warm. They were not rich. Johnny grew up eating what the garden and the neighborhood gave. He was, by every account, not the boy anyone would have picked out of the pack as destined for anything unusual. He was cheerful. He was popular. He was good with his hands and better with a joke. He was a middling student who did not finish high school. He dropped out to work, and he took the standard jobs a Raritan boy of that time took. Laundry truck, caddy, whatever came. There is nothing in the record of the young Johnny Basilone that predicts a Medal of Honor. There is only, when you look for it, a small persistent restlessness. A kid who was always finding a reason to be somewhere else. In 1934, at 17, he found the somewhere else that mattered. He enlisted in the United States Army. The Army of the mid-1930s was not the Army that would fight the Second World War. It was small, peacetime, professional, and its foreign postings for a Jersey kid who had never left the Northeast were another planet. Basilone drew the Philippines. He shipped out to Manila, the pearl of America's colonial holdings in the Western Pacific, and there, in that hot city of trolleys and colonial arcades and open-air markets, he became the young man his neighbors back home would only meet again in glimpses. He was a boxer. He fought in the Army's regimental bouts, welterweight, quick, with a punch heavier than his frame suggested and a chin that could take what came back. He made a name in the ring on that side of the Pacific, and somewhere along the line, the men in his outfit picked up a nickname for him that would follow him all the way to the end of his life. Not his given name, not John, not Johnny. Something the Marines who came after would inherit like a piece of unit lore. They called him Manila John. Round 1937, his enlistment ran out and he came home. Raritan was still Raritan. His mother still cooked for the whole tribe. He took work as a truck driver, delivering laundry across the New Jersey countryside, and settled for a while into the life the Army had let him leave. Did not fit him, and he knew it. Men who have seen palm trees and heard drums under equatorial rain do not, as a rule, come home and quietly accept an $8 a week job and a room at the top of the stairs. Basilone kept in fighting shape. He read the papers from the Pacific. He watched the world get darker. In Europe, Hitler's army rolled into Austria, then Czechoslovakia, then Poland, and by the end of 1939, the world was at war, and America still officially wasn't. In the Pacific, the Empire of Japan pushed further into China, and the American public began, slowly, to understand the direction the wind was blowing. Basilone, watching, made his decision quietly. He didn't want the army again. He wanted something harder. June 3, 1940, 18 months before Pearl Harbor, John Basilone walked into a recruiting office and enlisted in the United States Marine Corps. He was 23 years old. He told his family it was because the Marines got to the fight first. He was right about that. He would ship to Cuba, to Guantanamo Bay, to train in the muggy Caribbean, and then across the Pacific to the ships in the islands, and the war he could feel coming. He would be assigned to the 1st Battalion, 7th Marines, of the newly rebuilt 1st Marine Division, and he would be handed the weapon that the Marines had decided was going to keep their infantry alive on the beaches of the Pacific. The water-cooled Browning machine gun, an ugly, gorgeous piece of American ironmongery that could sustain a rate of fire no other gun on the field could match, so long as its 2 crewmen and their sergeant could feed it belt after belt after belt of .30 caliber and keep water in its jacket. He took to it the way some men take to a horse. He did not know in that summer of 1940 that inside of 30 months he would be the last man standing behind 2 of those guns on a ridge in a place he had never heard of, on the worst night of his life. He knew only that when the war came, and it was coming, he intended to be there. "Welcome to the Solomons, boys. You're going to love it here." Somebody said something like that in the dry, doomed humor of a Marine sergeant as the boats went ashore on the morning of August 7, 1942, on a green island in the Solomon chain that the Marines' own maps still had misspelled, Guadalcanal. Nobody in the boats knew yet that the name they were mispronouncing would attach itself to the entire First American Offensive of the Second World War, and that most of them were about to spend the next 6 months finding out exactly what a jungle can do to a body. The strategic picture is easy to state and impossible to feel. In the spring of 1942, after Pearl Harbor, after the fall of the Philippines, after the Battle of the Coral Sea and the near miracle of Midway, the Japanese Empire was building an airfield on Guadalcanal, an airfield that, once finished, would put its bombers within reach of the shipping lanes to Australia. American command decided the airfield had to be taken before it was finished, and the tool they had ready to do it was the 1st Marine Division, half-trained, under-equipped, and rushed into the Pacific because they were what there was. Basilone was in the 3rd Wave, his unit was the 1st Battalion of the 7th Marines, and the machine gun sections he ran were the backbone of the battalion's defensive line. They landed on beaches that were, at first, weirdly quiet. The small Japanese garrison had run for the jungle. And then they walked in the heat to the half-finished airstrip inland. The Marines took it. They named it Henderson Field after a Marine pilot killed at Midway. And then everything the Japanese Empire had that could shoot began, methodically, to try to take it back. What Guadalcanal did to the men who fought there is its own dark chapter of the American story, and it is important to feel it before you can feel what Basilone did on Lunga Ridge. Because he did not do it fresh. He did it after this. Malaria came through the division like weather. Nearly every man on that island was, at some point, running fevers that would have hospitalized a civilian. Rations were cut and cut again. The Marines ate captured Japanese rice with weevils in it and were glad of it. Nights were loud with Japanese naval bombardments, the great warships slipping through the strait and shelling the airstrip for hours on end, the ground shaking under men who could do nothing but lie in holes and wait for the noise to stop. The days were loud with air attacks, and every few days the Japanese army in the jungle threw itself against the perimeter, and men on both sides died in ways that did not make the newsreels. Basilone came out of that 6-week grind, lean, dark, feverish, and by every account that survived him, unshaken. He had one gift that the men who fought beside him always mentioned. He could rest. In the middle of the constant noise of Guadalcanal, in an environment that shredded the nerves of veterans, John Basilone would sit down against a sandbag and, if there was a lull, be asleep in a minute, and then be up and back at the gun the moment something happened, as if the sleep had never been interrupted. His men noticed. It made them steadier. Sergeants who can sleep on a ridge under bombardment are sergeants whose men do not panic. He drilled them constantly. M1917 Browning was a temperamental animal, a heavy piece of machined steel that sat on a tripod, its barrel wrapped in a water jacket to prevent the barrel from cooking off, its ammunition fed by cloth belts that could jam if they were damp or misaligned, its performance directly proportional to how many small things 2 men had done right in the 60 seconds before combat. Basilone taught his crews to strip and reassemble a gun in the dark, blindfolded, in the mud, sick, angry, in any condition, because every possible bad condition would eventually come. He himself could work a gun with the fluency of a man playing an instrument he had grown up on. His hands knew the weapon the way another man's hands know a woman's hair. He did not talk much about home. His men knew the outlines: New Jersey, big Italian family, sisters, mother who wrote letters, a hometown that would probably not recognize what he was seeing. He did not brag, he did not preach. He kept them fed with jokes and led them by doing the same jobs he asked them to do. And when they looked to see if their sergeant was scared, they saw a man walking around the position with his shirt off and his shoulders sunburned to leather, patting men on the back, adjusting a tripod, checking, belt. If Basilone was afraid, and he must have been, every man on Guadalcanal was afraid, he had decided not to spend it in front of his boys. By the 3rd week of October 1942, both sides were exhausted, but the Japanese command had decided the moment had come to finish it. Regimental assault of the veteran Sendai Division was assembled in the jungle south of the airfield, hidden by rain and darkness, and moved into position for the night attack that would either take Henderson Field or leave the Empire's hopes on the island buried in the mud. The evening of October 24, 1942, Basilone and his 2 machine gun sections settled behind their guns above the Lunga River, and the sky opened up. The rain came first, then the mortars, and then, a little before midnight, the first waves of the Sendai Division began to move out of the tree line toward the ridge. and the war John Basilone had been waiting for since the day he walked into that Jersey recruiting office. The war he had come 6,000 miles to find came, finally, all at once, up his hill. "They're through the wire. Keep firing. Do not let them reach the guns." A sergeant's voice in the dark, above the ridge, in the small hours of the 25th of October, calling his men online as the wave broke. The attack came the way experienced Japanese infantry attacks came in that war. Not in a Hollywood banzai charge, but in disciplined, close-order rushes, coordinated with mortar fire, screened by the noise of the rain and the confusion of a night with no moon. The first wave hit the American wire at multiple points along the perimeter. Some of it broke through in other sectors. Some of it died on other sectors' guns. But the piece of the line that Basilone's two sections defended did what it had been built and trained and dug in to do. It waited until the first Japanese soldiers were close enough to be certain of, and then it opened up. A water-cooled Browning firing at its cyclic rate makes a sound that anyone who has ever heard it will remember for the rest of his life. It is not the chatter of a lighter gun. It is closer to a heavy, deliberate hammer, a whump, 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 that comes out of the muzzle in a controlled roar, tracer rounds every fifth cartridge, cutting bright red trails through the dark. When two of those guns are firing together, sighted in on a defined killing zone, and men are walking into that zone, the results do not need to be described. The lead squads of the attacking wave fell where they were, and their bodies became the reason the second squads had to come around them. And so the killing continued. But the Japanese did not go home. That is the thing you have to feel in this chapter. Their courage is real and their orders were absolute, and they came and came and came. Their mortars found the range on the American positions. Their grenades, pitched by hand and later by knee mortar, came in over the parapets. And by the small hours of the night, the section on Basilone's right began to take casualties. A gun crew is 3 men, the gunner, the loader, and the ammo carrier, and every man on it matters. When men start to go down, everything gets harder. The gunner has to feed his own belt, or the loader has to fire while trying to load, or nobody is ranging the piece and the fire begins to go where it should not go. A section is 2 guns, 6 men. In the dark of that night, a mortar round, or perhaps a grenade, the survivors could never quite agree, fell into the right-hand emplacement of Basilone's line, and when the smoke cleared, there were only 2 men still able to fight. The rest were dead or unconscious. 1 gun in a 2-gun section is enough for the enemy to notice. Basilone noticed too. He was at the left-hand emplacement with his other section, running that gun and directing the fire of the other, when a runner came up in the dark and told him what had happened on the right. He did not radio. He did not send a message back to battalion. He did the thing that the citation and the after-action reports and the men who lived through it would all later confirm. He stood up in the middle of a firefight and moved. He brought a spare gun to the emplacement, positioned it, opened fire with it himself. He assessed the second gun, damaged but repairable, and repaired it in the dark, in the noise, with his own hands, feeding new parts by feel because there was no light to see by, and got it back into action, and manned it, and held the piece of line that had been about to fall. And there is a detail from that gun that survivors of that night would not stop telling for the rest of their lives. A water-cooled Browning, fired long enough at cyclic rate, does something to itself. The water in the jacket boils, then boils off. The steam vents. The metal underneath, denied its cooling, begins to run temperatures no infantryman was ever meant to touch. The barrel and the receiver, and the parts a man puts his hands on to keep the weapon working become, quite literally, red hot. And on that night, in the dark on the Lunga Ridge, Sergeant John Basilone kept the fire going by putting his bare hands on scalding metal. He handled hot barrels. He gripped gun parts that any sane man would have dropped. He burned his forearms doing it. He did not stop. He was at that moment a machine himself. A tired, sweating, sunburned, burned-armed 30-year-old Marine Sergeant from Raritan, New Jersey, running 2 guns like a one-man band, moving from one to the other in the dark, feeding belts, adjusting fire, shouting the 2 names of the 2 boys he had left on the right, telling them to keep firing, to hold, and the guns did. On the other side of the wire, in the wet grass and the trees, Japanese officers were beginning to have a very bad feeling. They had been told this ridge was thinly held. What they were hearing sounded like a battalion, What they were losing sounded like they were walking a company at a time into a wall. Their casualty reports made no sense. The fire kept coming as fast at 4 in the morning as it had at midnight, and there was no sag in it, no waver, no let-up that suggested Marines running out of ammunition or nerve. Except quietly, invisibly, the ammunition was running out. "Don't tell me it's low. Keep firing. I'll be back." With the eastern sky still black and the assault still coming, someone told Basilone what he already knew. The belts were nearly gone. His two guns had been firing at cyclic rates for hours, and even in the great American arithmetic of ammunition supply, hours of that adds up. The battalion's supply line to his ridge had been cut by Japanese infiltration. Small groups of enemy soldiers had gotten past his position and were, at that moment, between him and the ammunition dump. To get more belts to the guns, someone had to run through hostile ground in the dark with his arms full of ammunition, past enemy soldiers, and get back alive. Basilone told his two remaining gunners to keep firing whatever they had, and he went. It is hard to describe in the words we have what that trip must have been. He crossed ground he had walked in daylight and now could not see, past shapes he did not know were friend or enemy until they moved. He is said to have used his pistol, the standard Marine 45, 7 rounds and a spare magazine, to clear his way of men he encountered in the dark. The citation would later credit him with killing enemy soldiers, with both his machine gun and his pistol. And the pistol work almost certainly happened here, on that terrible resupply run, in the black between his ridge and the ammunition and back. He reached the ammo. He loaded his arms with belts. He came back. Then he went again. And by some accounts, again. When he was back on the guns, they kept firing. And now the sky began, faintly to gray. That gray was the end of it, and every Marine along the perimeter knew it. Japanese doctrine on Guadalcanal was, generally, to break off before daylight. Daylight meant American air power from Henderson Field, and American air power over a Japanese line meant slaughter. As the first hint of dawn came over the ridge, the assault died away. The fire from the tree line thinned. The mortars slowed and then stopped. And along the length of the Marine line, the whole tortured, half-broken, holding by the fingernails line, men began, cautiously, to lift their heads and look out across the ground they had been shooting into all night. What they saw in the growing light would be reported in different numbers by different sources. Regimental accounting of the entire battle for Henderson Field would eventually tally Japanese dead across the whole perimeter in the high hundreds, by some accounts approaching or exceeding 1,000, while the Marines lost, comparatively, a fraction of that. In front of Basilone's own emplacements, the ground was covered. The citation would credit him personally, with his machine gun and his pistol, with killing 38 men. The roughly 15 Marines who had been on the guns of his two sections at the start of the night, only 3 came off the ridge in the morning, still able to walk. 3. Every other man was dead or being carried away. He was one of the 3. His arms were burned to the bone in places. His hands were black with soot and blood and grease. He had not slept. He had not, so far as anyone could remember, sat down. Replacements moved up in the pale light. The section positions were reorganized. Basilone made sure his wounded were taken care of before he let anyone look at his hands, because that was the kind of man he was. He did not know that morning that what he had just done was going to change the shape of his life. The Marines around him understood at once. Word moved down the line before the sun was fully up. The sections on the ridge had held. A sergeant named Basilone had run guns and ammo and repairs single-handed through most of the night. Some men are saying he killed dozens. Officers came to look. They talked. They took names. They wrote things down. The war moved on. The 7th Marines fought their way through the rest of the Guadalcanal campaign. The island was declared secure in early 1943. The 1st Marine Division was pulled out to Australia to recover. There in the port town of Balcombe, on May 21, 1943, a slightly embarrassed, sunburned, hospital-tanned Marine sergeant was called out onto a parade ground, and Major General Alexander Vandegrift himself, the man who had commanded the entire Guadalcanal fight, stepped up and pinned a small, blue ribbon medal to his uniform, the Medal of Honor. John Basilone of Raritan, New Jersey, the truck driver, the Manila boxer, the Army washout who could not sit still in a Jersey kitchen, became the first enlisted Marine of the entire Second World War to receive the highest decoration his country could give. He wrote home. He asked his mother not to make a fuss. He said in substance that the medal belonged to the men on the ridge with him, most of whom would not be coming home to wear one. It was the last quiet thing he would say for a while, because the country he had come home to fight for had, in the meantime, learned his name. And the country was about to ask him for something he had not, until that moment, considered giving. "You've done enough, John. Come home. Sell bonds. Stay alive." Half the country said something like that to him in the year after the medal, and the other half meant it even when they didn't say it. Because in the summer of 1943, John Basilone came back to America, a national celebrity, and the machinery of the American home front closed around him like a hand. The Marine Corps sent him home. They sent him home for excellent reasons. He was a walking, breathing Marine advertisement, the exact sort of hero the country needed to see and touch and cheer for, while it bought war bonds to pay for the aircraft carriers and the tanks and the tens of millions of tons of steel that were being poured into the war. He came off a ship in San Francisco, and from that moment his life stopped being his own. Raritan, New Jersey, held a parade. His hometown, in the small brick streets and the churches and the tailor shops, turned out end to end for the boy they had known as Johnny. His picture ran on the front page of every newspaper in the state and quite a few beyond it. Life magazine wrote him up. Radio hosts asked for him. He shook the hands of strangers so many times in so many cities that people said his palm never quite stopped feeling raw. The Treasury Department attached him to war bond drives, and Basilone, uneasy, uncomfortable, a man who had told his own mother the medal was not really his, stood in stadiums and factories and civic halls and said, in his shy, plain-spoken New Jersey voice, what they had asked him to say: "Buy bonds, support the boys still over there. We can win this." Americans emptied their pockets. In city after city, the sight of the boy from Raritan, with the blue ribbon at his collar, loosened tens of millions of dollars out of ordinary paychecks and into the war effort. He earned it. He earned every dollar. There has almost never been a more effective bond salesman in the country's history, and everyone, the Marine Corps, the Treasury, his family, his friends, his own body, assumed, as the tour rolled on, that this was the rest of his war. He had done his job. He had done more of it than any other enlisted Marine of the war had done. Officers began quietly discussing the natural next step for a man like him. He would be offered an officer's commission, a promotion out of the enlisted ranks and into the officer corps, a permanent duty assignment stateside, an instructor's job at Quantico or Camp Pendleton, where his experience could shape hundreds of new Marines. It was, in every measurable way, the correct answer. It was the answer his family wanted. It was the answer the Marine Corps was ready to give him. John Basilone said no. The words attributed to him differ in the retellings, but the substance is consistent, and it is the sentence that shows you the whole shape of the man. He said, in effect, that he was a plain soldier. He said he did not want a commission and did not want a desk. He said the boys were still over there. He said he belonged with them, not on a stage, and he asked straight out to be sent back to a Marine rifle unit and returned to the war. Officers argued. His family pleaded. His mother is said to have wept. The Marine Corps did not want to send its most famous enlisted man back into the meat grinder because it understood the cost of losing him. Not only the human cost, but the propaganda cost of a nation watching its Medal of Honor, darling, be killed in some new Pacific island. They tried to redirect him. They offered him softer assignments. He kept asking. And then, in the middle of all that, life did to him what life does to men who have decided to go back. It gave him a reason to stay. At Camp Pendleton in Southern California, where he was eventually posted as a machine gun instructor while the argument continued, he met a Marine sergeant named Lena Mae Riggi. She was in the Marine Corps Women's Reserve, of Italian descent like him, calm, private, humored by his celebrity but unimpressed by it. They dated quietly, then not quietly, and on July 10, 1944, at St. Mary's, Star of the Sea in Oceanside, California, Sergeant John Basilone and Sergeant Lena Mae Riggi were married. Here is the moment where the story becomes, in one very specific way, harder than the ridge. Basilone did not change his mind. He had a wife now, a young, intelligent, deeply in love Marine sergeant of his own, who had every right to expect that this famous, decorated, fought-out man would take the safe path she was quietly praying he would take. He didn't. He renewed the request. He told her, as best any of us can reconstruct, the same thing he had told the officers and his family. He was a plain soldier. His outfit was going back into the fight. He would be going with them. She did not argue in the end. She married a Marine. She had known who he was. Late 1944, the Marine Corps gave up trying to save him from himself. His orders came through. He was assigned to Charlie Company, 1st Battalion, 27th Marine Regiment, of the newly formed 5th Marine Division, a green outfit built around a spine of Guadalcanal and Bougainville veterans, and he took over as a machine gun section leader. His new Marines, boys who had trained on his own lessons at Camp Pendleton, could not believe their luck. They had drawn as their section leader the most decorated enlisted Marine in the entire Corps. One of those boys, a young private from Iowa named Chuck Tatum, would later write it down. He said the men learned from Basilone what no manual could teach: how to be steady, how to be quiet, how to do their small job right when nothing around them was right. He said Basilone did not lecture. He said Basilone showed you. In January of 1945, Charlie Company shipped out from Hawaii. The transports were heavy with young Marines who did not know their destination yet by name, only by the certainty that another island lay ahead of them. The island was called Iwo Jima. Basilone had less than 4 weeks left to live. "Move! Get off the beach! We die here if we don't move." At around 10 in the morning on the 19th of February 1945, on a strip of black sand on the southeastern coast of a volcanic island most Americans had still, 3 years into the Pacific War, never heard of, the most decorated enlisted Marine of the Second World War was shouting those words at the young men in his section. The island was Iwo Jima. Its purpose, in the American strategic plan, was blunt: to give the B-29 superfortresses hitting Tokyo a place to land when they were shot up. To take it, the Marines had put ashore 3 full divisions. And in the first hours of D-Day, the Japanese defenders, dug in with a genius that the Americans were only beginning to understand, held their fire, let the beaches fill with men and equipment, and then from concrete blockhouses and cave positions on the high ground, opened up. Red Beach 2, the strip of sand Basilone's Charlie Company was assigned to, became a killing ground almost at once. Landing craft blew up. Amtraks burned. Marines died on the beach the way corn goes down in a hailstorm. The dark volcanic sand was so soft that men sank to their shins with every step, dragging their gear as machine gun fire and mortar fire raked them from positions they could not see. Every instinct in a soldier's body screams, on a beach like that, to lie down behind the nearest ridge of sand and stay there. Every experienced NCO on that beach knew that lying down behind a sand ridge on Iwo Jima was a way to die more slowly. Basilone knew it. He got his section on their feet. He moved them. What happened next is documented by men who were there, including Chuck Tatum, who watched it from a few yards away and would spend the rest of his life telling the story. Charlie Company was pinned by fire from a concrete Japanese blockhouse, a squat, low, thick-walled fortification set into the terraces above the beach, its gun ports pouring rounds down onto the sand. There was no way forward as long as it was firing. Basilone assessed it, and then he did the thing that a machine gun section leader is not, in most versions of the war, supposed to do. He gave up his own gun position, ordered his men to keep the pressure on, and moved. He moved off to a flank, worked his way in the dead ground the Japanese gunners could not sweep, and climbed up above the blockhouse, on top of it, while Chuck Tatum, cued by his old instructor, poured suppressing machine gun fire from below to keep the enemy inside their firing ports. From that impossible one-man position, Basilone attacked the blockhouse with hand grenades and demolition charges and directed a flamethrower team onto its openings. And, in the phrase the Navy Cross citation would later use, destroyed the position and its garrison. He did not do it in an afternoon. He did it in minutes. The blockhouse died. Charlie Company got up off the sand, and it should have ended in any decent movie of his life, right there. But Iwo Jima did not care about decent movies. As Basilone was moving inland with his section, an American Sherman tank came under fire from a Japanese anti-tank position and became disabled in a minefield in front of the beach terraces. Its crew was alive but trapped. If the tank moved, it would blow itself up. If it stayed, it would be destroyed by fire. Basilone, an enlisted Marine machine gunner with no obligation to a tank at all, saw the situation and, under continuous enemy mortar and artillery fire, moved out into the open ground and personally guided that tank foot by foot through the mines to safety. And then, on his way back to his section, moving up off the beach as he had been moving all morning, a Japanese mortar round, or by some accounts, an artillery shell, landed near him. He and several of the men with him were killed instantly. He had been on Iwo Jima for less than a day. He was 28 years old. The Marines who reached him could not, at first, quite believe it. It was Basilone. Basilone did not die. Basilone had come out of the worst night on Guadalcanal with burned arms and a Medal of Honor. Basilone had walked back into the fire on purpose after the country had given him every reason to stay home. Basilone was the one who couldn't be killed. And he was. They wrapped his body and moved on, because they had no choice. Iwo Jima was going to eat another 6,000 Marine dead in the weeks ahead, and there was no time on that beach for a hero's ceremony. The rest is public. The Marine Corps posthumously awarded John Basilone the Navy Cross for the blockhouse and the tank on Red Beach, the Mammoth. And the citation is worth reading, because it makes plain what he did on the last morning of his life. He remains, to this day, the only enlisted Marine of the entire Second World War to hold both the Medal of Honor and the Navy Cross. He is buried at Arlington National Cemetery in Section 12 at Grave 384 in a row of the country's honored dead. His Medal of Honor is on display at the National Museum of the United States Marine Corps in Quantico, Virginia, where Marines take their families to see it. In 1949, the Navy commissioned a destroyer, U.S. Basilone, with his name on the hull, and generations of American sailors have carried that name across the seas since. His hometown of Raritan holds a parade for him every year that has, most years, drawn crowds larger than the town's own population, because the country he served has decided that he will not be forgotten. And his wife, Lena, who had married him in Oceanside in the summer of 1944, knowing exactly the man he was, lived on for another 54 years. She never remarried. When she died in 1999, she left instructions that she be buried, when the time came, not next to another husband, for there was not one, but at a distance, honoring John's own Arlington grave from her own resting place in California. She had been a Marine sergeant's wife. She stayed a Marine sergeant's wife. Think about the shape of it. A boy from Raritan who could not sit still, who left the Army and came home, and left home for the Marines and went to Guadalcanal, and on one impossible night held a ridge with 2 guns in his own bare hands, and killed 38 men who were trying to overrun his country's first offensive of the war, who came home to a parade and a Life magazine cover and every dollar the war bond machine could throw at his image, who was offered the safe way out, the officer's bars, the instructor's post, the marriage, the life, and who said quietly that he was a plain soldier and belonged with his men, who walked back into it, who died on the first morning of another island doing exactly the small, hard job he had done on the first one. The enemy at Lunga Ridge in the dark on the night of October 24, 1942, thought they were attacking a broken line. They thought the Marines were too sick, too tired, too few. They thought the guns on that ridge would fall silent by midnight. They were wrong about every part of it, because the guns kept firing, and they kept firing, and they kept firing, through burned hands and empty belts, through casualties and the dying in the endless dark, until the sun came up over the Solomon Sea, and it was Marines, not Sendai Division infantry, still standing on the ridge. One Marine mostly, a plain soldier, from Raritan, New Jersey, who was too restless to stay home twice.